I would like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure when his department will undertake trials of new technology bus services on the Isle of Man.
On the Minister for Infrastructure, Mr Harmer.
Thank you, Mr President. Every year, my officers take in consideration updates from industry and how they can be applied in the Isle of Man. We have made some investments over recent years, providing new ticketing options, smart cards, next stop announcements, a mobile phone app, a journey planner, Euro 6 emission engines and, of course, new buses. The latest trial vehicles have hybrid power, USB chargers and passenger feedback points. I would hope of all of those in this House, an honourable member would agree that we have an excellent bus service provided by great staff doing a great job.
Members may remove jackets if they wish. Mrs Caine, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr President. I would agree with the Minister that we have an excellent, comfortable bus service, but the question specifically relates to new technologies in bus services. Now, I'm aware that they have been trialling a number of new technology buses over December and January, and I think what I'd like to know is, does the Minister expect those trials will have been completed by Busfannon before any new buses are ordered? Could the Minister confirm when the Department last ordered new buses for public transport and when it next expects to replace any of its fleet? And is there any possibility that these would include new technology buses?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr President. In the wider context, absolutely, there will be new technology. In terms of, and I think that the question is more around emissions. So, during the last 10 years, the main developments with hybrid buses have been aimed at city centre operations, whereas we have a more inter-urban style of operation with higher speeds and higher mileage. Later this year, the Department is to take delivery of a demonstrator bus, which uses the latest hybrid technology. This will enable the Department to see if advances will benefit our style of operation. This will be the first time the manufacturer has been willing to lend us a demonstrator, as up to now our requirements have been outside the technology available. We also have evaluated the options with CNG, compressed natural gas, as a fuel which has been extensively used in France. The costs of building and maintaining pumping stations and reliability of vehicles have been issues. Bearing in mind that Euro 6 technology in diesel is cleaner than the gas bus, we have ruled out this option at this present time.
Honourable Member for Middle, Mr Simmons.
Thank you, Mr President. I am aware that the Department of Infrastructure has recently forged close links with the City of Liverpool. And our Merseyside friends now have a fleet of electric buses and indeed have now added hydrogen buses which are zero emission. Will he consult with Liverpool with a view to taking on board best practice to see if we can introduce electric and hydrogen buses to our island?
Mr Harmer.
Thank you. Of course we will, and of course we will. As you know, I'm very keen on this technology. I'm very keen to move as fast as we can. Obviously, we have to be, as the Treasury Minister said, we have to be responsible within our budget. It has to be good financial sense as well. I think let's remember, members, that whilst there are trials, there's a whole impact of service parts, fleets, and whole cost of operation. So we have to do this in a very managed approach. But of course, I will absolutely will be trying to move very forward, very quick. For example, just to give some background on electric buses, Mercedes have just launched their electric Citroën NVV in Mannheim, and are the first operator. They found the mileage in a vehicle what the mileage will do is actually very weather dependent, as low as 130 kilometres a day when it's cold. I understand that they believe this problem is solvable and expect the worldwide launch of Phase 3 design to be on the road to 2021. We will, in that period, get the opportunity to see the inside of this experiment, and certainly we can ask to see a demonstrator, to see how available the technology is here. So ultimately, we could have electric buses running on trial in 2022. We've got to bear in mind that of our topography, we're not a city. We don't have, if you like, those short lengths. We actually have, it's an interurban concept, so we have to have the right bus, what we have. And also we need to bear in mind that technology is moving very, very fast, so when we do pick the right bus for us, or the right fleet of buses, that we have a fleet replacement policy. Obviously, as you know, and as members are aware, I'm very keen that we move this within our financial planning as quickly as we can, but obviously we have to do it within what technology is there, and what technology is best for us.
Honourable members, I have 5 further supplementary questions. I would ask that we are please not repetitive and remind you this is not a debate. Honourable Member for Ramsey, Mr Hooper.
Thank you very much, Mr President. The Minister mentioned in his original response about new technology that they've got an app where you can use to buy tickets. I'm just wondering if the Minister has any plans to widen the use of this new technology to upgrade and streamline the quite cumbersome go-card system that is currently in use across bus vanning.
Thank you. I think that's a debate about go-cards, which is a completely different debate, and whether people feel there's too many or too less. I mean, sometimes people talk about Oyster cards and things like that, but actually they have many different in other jurisdictions, and they talk about the merits of one card over another. This really isn't a debate about go-cards. This is a debate about technology, but I agree with the sentiment wherever possible. And what we've seen, for example, with contactless and all of these good things, Wi-Fi on the bus, it's absolutely important that our buses are have good technology, that they're comfortable, and I think that's what we've delivered. But obviously, all of these changes have to be managed. And of course, as we last in this court last month, we talked about electric vehicle policy, and how that the department is very keen that we lead by example, and by 2030 see 300 vehicles that are electric, and also that we work with the MUA and other institutions to deliver electric vehicles. As I say, I think I'm very passionate about this, but it has to be done obviously at the right time, and we have to work with other agencies.
Honourable Member for Douglas East, Ms Bettison.
Thank you. The Minister talked about the bus that we were taking delivery of on a trial basis. I wonder if he could give some idea of what the weighting will be on cost versus the capability of those buses, and what mileage we would have as an average for our buses in a day, just in terms of the expectation you talked about with the limitations on electric buses.
Okay, I don't have, as I say, with electric buses, I've had some trials in Germany. The number of miles was quite small, kilometres, it was 130. Obviously, we want a lot more than that. If there was to be electric buses, they would be, or hybrid buses, they're best suited to Douglas, so that's where we would move first. But just give you a scale of how technology has changed. Hybrid buses, for example, were 150% cost more. Batteries were costing 140,000, and they were lasting 3 to 5 years. That was a few years ago. Now the differential is about £12,000 for a hybrid bus. So this is a very rapidly moving space. So it's one that we've got to make very wise decisions, because if we jump in too soon, obviously a fleet should have the same vehicles. You know, you don't want one vehicle from one hybrid bus, an electric bus. You don't want a mishmash. You actually want a considered policy, and that's what we'll be trying to deliver.
Honourable Member Mrs Caine.
Thank you, Mr President. Can I ask the Minister, I didn't hear an answer to my previous supplementary question as to when the department last ordered replacement buses for its fleet, and when it will next be expecting to take delivery or placing an order for replacement buses. Because in 2016, Tynwald committed to the island reducing its greenhouse gas emissions by 80% by 2050 compared with 1990 levels. And I'd like the Minister to clarify what his department's roadmap is to get there and contribute to that. Can the Minister confirm what is the current tonnage of CO2 emissions over a year by public transport? What were they in the 1990s? So what is his target for 2050 or at periods up to that date?
Minister.
Okay, thank you, Mr. President. In essence, we are improving our buses all along. We're moving to Euro 6 standard, and I believe we've recently taken order. We have of those. We take orders every year. We are looking to have more and more environmentally friendly buses, but I suppose my main point would be that whatever we could be talking about around the edges here, because in actual fact the most best thing for all of us to do is take the bus rather than the car, and what we will be doing is trying to introduce more policies this year that will try to encourage people to say, let's say for example, take a bus on a Friday or things like that, because I think we're in danger of going down the detail of the bus, but a bus compared to the CO2 emissions of cars is significantly less than the 20 people or 30 or 40 people that are carried in cars. So I think, you know, there's a bigger, wider issue. That's why I've been passionate on active travel, I'm passionate on buses, and I'm passionate on electric vehicles. So I think you have to see this whole, in the context, a wide context, a strategy of lowering our emissions.
Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Minister mentioned that Mercedes have recently introduced a new electric Citaro bus, which is very similar to the buses we have, except it doesn't produce emissions, and they're currently running in Berlin and Hamburg. Unfortunately, Mercedes have been a lot slower than other manufacturers to embrace these new electric buses. How tied is the department to procuring its buses from Mercedes? Will they consider other brands who are farther down this journey?
Minister.
Thank you. But I hear the point, but what we've got to remember is, and the danger that we have here, and we're trying to develop a fleet policy in this court, which I think is very dangerous, is that if you have multiple types of different vehicles with multiple different parts, you obviously have to have spare parts in all of those different vehicles. So as we move our policy, as we develop, and as the member knows, and all members know, that I'm very keen that we do this and we get to an environmental, the best technology that we can, we have to move in a considered way. So for sake of argument, if there was a particular bus brand that over the next 10 years looked to be the winner in a particular way in electric buses or so forth, then that would be a consideration. But I think what we can't do is have one bus from one manufacturer, one bus from another manufacturer. We'd have a very sort of poor... it's about the management of the police, it's about the skills that the people have to train in those parts. So we've got to be very careful that we don't have a mismatch of different vehicles that actually would cause more service delivery problems. The most important thing I would urge members to consider is that we have a good bus network that's reliable, that has good parts and a modern fleet.
My list is growing. Honourable Member for Council, Ms August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd just like to ask the Minister for Infrastructure whether or not he would agree that this isn't necessarily just about the technology itself, but it's also about interconnecting with cycling, that perhaps there might be other ways that are cheaper than relying on exponential tech that we might make in the meantime. And whether or not he has any interest in sort of intermodal transportation regarding cycling, so that perhaps tourists and commuters might potentially go halfway by bus and then, may be able to...
Honourable Member, this is not a debate and the subject is being widened. Question has been put. Minister.
Thank you. I think I would say we're very keen to embrace new technology. Active travel is a really important part of an overall strategy, and the interworking of buses and walking. Obviously, walking and cycling have the lowest carbon emissions, and therefore, if we can encourage more of that, make it, or at least give people the choice, I think that would be excellent. We want to see that sort of interworking. I'm very keen that we do that as an island, and I think that's why we've got the right strategies with our electric vehicle strategy, with our active travel strategy, and the work that we talked about in another place regarding emissions. So I think it's a wider piece that we're talking about. But absolutely, as I said, we're committed to take on a trial this year. It depends how the trial goes. If the trial is successful, obviously that will see those buses becoming more widespread.
Honourable Member for Douglas North, Mr Peake.
Thank you, Mr President, and I'm glad to hear that the Minister realises that you do have to plan these things. It's very important to do that. It's not about developing policy on the hoof. But there are many people who do plan and make a statement. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, actually said in 2016 that he would not buy any diesel buses after 2018, and he stuck to that. He's actually now buying electric buses. When will the Minister, he and the Isle of Man of Infrastructure, commit to making a vision for new technology buses?
Minister.
And that's absolutely the purpose why we've got the trials, because let's consider, whilst the bus might be appropriate for London, when we have longer distances, higher mileage, if they break down in the middle of nowhere, then we will have a situation where the bus isn't served, and our primary focus has to be service the bus. So once the technology is right for the Isle of Man, and we will do those trials to do that, we'll absolutely we'll bring those buses in.
Any room on top? Mrs. Caine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can I ask the Minister again, for absolute clarity, to respond to my previous questions? When has he last ordered buses? When does he expect to take the next delivery of buses? What are the CO2 emissions or reduction in those? In the low emission surface transport policy he brought to Tynwald last month, he said his department will show innovation, leadership and vision in encouraging the widespread adoption of low emission vehicles. Does he intend that to be for bus vanning, or is the onus on the public embracing the new technology? In terms of trialling buses, I understand the department trialled the Wrightbus Micro Hybrid bus between December and January, and the Alexander Dennis Enviro bus was trialled over 30 days also. What happened as a result of those trials? Is there any possibility that those buses would be suitable for the Isle of Man?
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Some of those detailed questions about CO2 emissions and bus orders, I will distribute to members that information. Regarding the trials, obviously that is what is influencing our decision. As I said, we were very bold in our policy, in the fleet policy. It wasn't just about electric cars, it was actually about our fleet. And we said 300 vehicles by 2030 would be, that was our vision to replace with electric vehicles. So we are very committed, we are leading in this way, and we will deal with as the technology allows.
Honourable Member for Arbury, Castown Maloo, Mr Moorhouse.
Thank you, Mr President. Does the Minister agree that in addition to environmental considerations, customer service and costs are two of the key measures which must be considered when updating the fleet? And alternatives have been actively trialled here in the last 12 months, which are allowing us to have a really effective planning going forward.
Minister.
Yes, Mr President, I would agree with that. It's as we get this information, and it's about service and costs. And whilst we'd all like to see everything as soon as we can, we have to do those trials and we have to make considered judgments.
Honourable Member for Council, Mr Crookall.
Thank you, Mr President. The Minister pointed out before in his statement that his reasons for wanting to stick basically with Mercedes by the sounds of it, and as my colleague Mrs Caine said just now, that there was trials with two other makes recently. You know, the buses we have at the moment, the diesel buses, are the Mercedes make, but into the future when we go down the electric or the hybrid route, they're more likely to be something else, I would suggest, as they're already being trialled out there. I would suggest now might be a good time to try an electric bus from whichever make along the promenade, so as people living in the middle have a chance to operate. And would you commit to having a look at that, so people can don't have to cross from one side to the other to get the bus by walking nearly a mile? If you had a bus going up and down the electric bus, it would suit people and would be a good trial for the island.
Minister to reply.
Thank you. Yeah. Of course, we will consider that as I said with the other member regarding the information we have for Liverpool. And if we, as I say, we haven't just trialled Mercedes buses. We've, as one member pointed out, we've trialled with Alexander Dennis and all sorts of other buses. So of course we will trial other buses, and that information will guide our thinking going forward of our future fleet plans. My point about was that what you don't want to do is if you like, knee-jerk from one fleet type of manufacturer to another, that you actually make a considered and long-term planning. But in terms of trials, of course, we will look into what other trials we can do, because I am equally passionate to I think a lot of members here, that we do move forward with this technology as soon as practically we can.
Ms August Hanson.
Thank you, Mr President. I'd just like to ask the Minister how much budget has been set aside for this?
Reply, sir.
Thank you. We have we can sort of obviously provide information for what was in the budget in terms of our fleet replacement programme. That was in the budget, but in terms of trials, obviously we work those within the budgets. I can obviously supply those figures as well.
Honourable Member Mr Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Minister has quite well outlined, I think, some of the strategic issues around the implementation of new technology, and he's mentioned several times the need for a proper plan around bringing this in. So I'd just like to ask the Minister, will some of these strategic issues around technology be addressed by his new integrated transport strategy that's coming forward? Will a target date for an all-electric or a low-carbon fleet be built into that integrated transport strategy, and when does he intend to lay that before Tynwald?
Minister to reply.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. We may be conflating two issues. If certainly it's something we need to do the research on, and that's why we need the trials, because, as I said, our network is very different to inner city urban networks. So if we were to move to an all-electric, it may not be in the same sort of time frame as some of those other jurisdictions. So we will consider it. Whether it will actually be electric buses, we fully consider the integrated strategy that we need to determine, because the trouble is the technology is moving so fast that we don't want to make a premature decision that could end up being costly. But obviously that is something that I will consider, and it will be something that we will plan for further, and will plan electric bus strategy. Because as I said, members, I'm keen that we do move towards that. But it is technology dependent, and we must bear in mind the other issues that we have here, of course, which is to do with reliability, serviceability, costs, and so forth. We mustn't lose sight of those other issues as well.
Mr Shimmons. Final supplementary, Mrs Caine.
Thank you, Mr President. I thank the Minister for undertaking to come back with more information on emissions and purchases. But those people who protested outside Tynwald last month, and are going to do again this month, and the broad spectrum of public opinion on the island want action. This is somewhere that we should take action, and we need leadership from the Department for Infrastructure. So could we ask the Minister, if I'm right in thinking the lifespan of a bus is about 10 years on the island, would he put strenuous efforts into identifying whether, if electric buses are not suitable for the more rural routes on the island, whether hybrid or hydrogen-powered or other options might mean that we have a mishmash of different kind of buses for different kinds of services operated by Bus Van, and will he come back to Tynwald and give us the roadmap of how he is going to work to zero emissions, perhaps by 2030? What is the target for low or no emissions buses by 2030 within public transport?
Reply, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I said, the member talks about, that's the reason why we're trialling buses. That's the reason why we're trialling hybrid buses, to see if that is a way forward. I would imagine that we would have electric buses that would perhaps be in Douglas, but a different type of bus elsewhere. But that's the whole purpose of why we're trialling buses. And I should point out that in the strategy last month, we talked about 300 out of 1,000, or 30%, and leading by example. That wasn't everything becoming electric. And bearing in mind that heavy vehicles are much more difficult to make electric because of their weight, and there are other technologies such as hydrogen. So electric may not be the full answer when it comes to those heavy vehicles. But we are dependent on technology. Technology is moving very fast, and we will develop as the technology develops.